battlefield restoration project that I guess it's been about 10 years ago now, that we cleared 14 acres of the battlefield to restore it to its wartime appearance. So you get an idea of what our grand vision is for the rest of this park. We have to remove the trees throughout the Union Confederate Avenue to keep the vegetation on the side of our tour road to form a vegetative screen to block out all the modern development by which this park is now engulfed. Vicksburg National Military Park has, over the last several years, rapidly become an island of green in an urban sea. There is development all along our boundary, and in some places even outright encroachment. And so we're trying very hard to maintain the integrity of our boundaries. But we're convinced that visitors coming into the park, driving through the park, have a dense wall of trees and vegetation on their right, on the outside of the park, and an open area on their left between the battle lines. Where's their attention going to be riveted? It's going to be riveted on the battlefield and the events that transpired here versus being distracted by all the modern development adjacent to our boundary.
Yes,
now this particular stretch of line is manned by the Alabama Brigade led by Stephen D. Lee. We talked at length about this brigade when we were down at Fort Gibson. At that point in time, it was commanded by Brigadier General Ed Tracy. All the Tracys killed in action, the first of 5 Confederate generals to die in the defense of Vicksburg. Killed in action early in the morning of May 1st, 1863. He would be replaced temporarily by the senior colonel of that brigade, Colonel Isham Garrett, who will later be promoted to Brigadier General and be killed by a Union sharpshooter here during the siege of Vicksburg itself on June the 17th. But Garrett, however, will not be named the permanent commander of this brigade. Rather, Brigadier General Stephen D. Lee will. Lee had served with the Army of Northern Virginia in the East. I know Mary was asking me to go to Bloody Lane and Antietam here sometime today if we have the opportunity. Of course, Lee gains great fame at Antietam, commanding his battalion of artillery there in the vicinity of Dunkard Church. Due to his action at Antietam and elsewhere, he is promoted to Brigadier General. But at that point in time, there are just no vacancies in the Army of Northern Virginia for another brigadier. So he sent out west. He will command a brigade of Louisianians at Chickasaw Bayou, where we were the first day of our tour. But here at Vicksburg, by the time of the siege, he is in command of the Alabama Brigade. It's interesting to point out that Lee, as a result of sealing the breach here at Railroad Redoubt, will be indelibly linked with Vicksburg National Military Park. In the early 1890s, Captain John Merritt, who was an Iowa veteran in command of the Governor's Grays from Iowa, visited. Former Union Captain John Merritt visited Vicksburg with the Governor's Grays of Iowa. They were on their way to New Orleans for a military demonstration. They stopped in Vicksburg, and Mary took advantage of this opportunity to sound out Southern veterans about the idea of setting aside the battlefield at Vicksburg as a national military park, comparable to that already established in Chickamauga, Chattanooga, already established at Antietam, and already established at Shiloh. Mary realized that this idea could not succeed without the support of Southern veterans. And who better to speak for the Southern veterans than General Stephen D. Lee, who went on to become a lieutenant general, later on became president of what is today Mississippi State University, and was a member of the state legislature here in Mississippi. Well, Lee was enamored by the idea and agreed to support it. As a result, in 1895, the Vicksburg National Military Park Association is established. It's a collection, if you will, an association of Union and Confederate veterans who gathered together for the purpose of petitioning the Congress of the United States to set aside this battlefield as a national military park. Stephen D. Lee of Mississippi was elected president of the association. That association worked for 4 long years from 1895 until 1899, when on February 21st of 1899, President William McKinley signed the legislation by which this park was established. Under the Enabling Act of the park was placed under a 3-man commission, all 3 of whom had to be veterans of the siege of Vicksburg. 1 Confederate representative, 2 Union representatives. Well, the logical choice for the Confederate representative was Stephen D. Lee, and so he was appointed to the commission. And the first act of this commission was to elect a chairman. And so the 2 Union representatives, Captain William T. Rigby of Iowa, Captain James Everest of Illinois, voted Stephen D. Lee as chairman of the commission. So he is the only former Confederate to serve as a chairman, be elected chairman, I should say, of a park commission. The Chickamauga Commission finally came under a Confederate because all the commissioners died off and he was the only one left. But Lee is actually elected, so he's the only former Confederate elected chairman of a park commission, in essence the park's first superintendent. And up here on your right you'll see the bust of Colonel Thomas Wall, who led the counterattack that sealed the breach, and then the standing statue of Stephen D. Lee. It was hoped that this monument to Stephen D. Lee could be dedicated in his lifetime. The other two commissioners, the two Union commissioners, conspired to solicit funds. The first contribution was made by those Union commissioners. The next contribution was made by no less an individual than Theodore Roosevelt, President of the United States. Unfortunately for the commissioners, before the monument could be erected, Stephen D. Lee passed away. This is the Alabama monument here in the center of the line, manned by Lee's Alabama Brigade. The woman is Alabama herself, being defended by her men. That's one of our newer monuments, if you will, dedicated in the early 1950s. As mentioned, Vicksburg is one of the more densely monumented battlefields in the world, boasting of over 1,300 monuments. 28 states were represented by combat troops here at Vicksburg. All 28 of those states have erected state memorials, the first being the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1903, the last being the Commonwealth of Kentucky in 2001. Here you see the 14 acres that we had cleared. Midway between us and the line of monuments in the distance by the tree lines, you see the Union sharpshooters line marked by those bronze and iron tablets. That trench is an original military feature of the landscape. It is still 5 feet deep, yet until recently it was completely hidden from view and virtually nobody knew it existed other than a few select members of the park staff. And so that's the view we want to give to our visitors, the entire length of this battlefield, which is exactly how it appeared in 1863. No trees between the lines whatsoever. This is Fort Garrett, known as Square Fort, as Ed will tell you. If you were a Civil War soldier, you never want to have a fort named after you. It means one thing: you can kill it in action. Sure enough, Square Fort would be later renamed Fort Garrett. We'll get out here and talk about Fort Garrett and the operations that took place here during the siege, and give you an opportunity to admire this vista that we have restored just a few years ago.
I spoke to you from the Baldwin's Ferry Road south to beyond the Halls Ferry Road is the levelest ground in the area. The Confederates have a strong point a mile and a half south of us at Salient Work on the Halls Ferry Road, and we left the railroad redoubt. So at a midpoint between these two Confederate strong points, which are connected by a line of rifle pits with artillery positions, batteries placed along at selected places, so the Confederates will erect Square Fort here on this area. Now, Square Fort will be attacked by Union forces on May 19th and again on May 22nd. As we'll find out at Stockade Redan, only on Sherman's front do the Union forces press their attack on the 19th. On the 22nd, the Union division commanded by General Osterhaus will attack Square Fort, defended by units of General S.D. Lee's Alabama Brigade from the 20th Alabama. Immediately south of them, you'll be in the Georgia Brigade of General Cummings, and south of the Georgia Monument was ceded to the city in 1964 to be maintained, quote, in a park-like manner by the city. We'll say no more about that. So Osterhaus does not get close. He does about the same as McPherson's people, except that they had great redoubt. And now, as the siege begins, the Union are going to decide on the 25th to lay siege to Vicksburg. One of the principles of siegecraft, dating back to the Roman times, is to get your people as close to the enemy as you can. Then they would use these storming towers, these big towers they would push up and fire flaming arrows down into the works. But so that is the difference now is that you're going to dig saps or approach trenches. Now, the Union forces, when they commence their operations, which is designed to place themselves up into position where they can storm the enemy work, the same as you would do in Roman or Middle Ages time. You will begin this. Your General Hovey will be operating through. He's in the 13th Corps. His chief engineer is Lieutenant Peter Haynes, for whom Haynes Point is named in Washington. So he's going to drive forward to approach trenches. One of them you're going to see is going to zigzag up that finger, that nose, that ridge right to your right if you turn half right. And the other one is going to come up this nose here if you turn half left. So these trenches, they're going to use various types of sap rollers. But the most popular type used at Vicksburg, you get a core of either cotton bales or a core of 55-gallon barrels filled with dirt. You wrap them with cane. So that will give you a portable barricade, which you can push ahead of you, roughly 10 feet in length and 3 to 4 feet in height. So you can see, you push that ahead. Now what you have, using that type of sap roller, the cane will absorb the shot of cannonballs. It gives you a very flexible, and they do not have a great deal of muzzle velocity weapons at that time. And the cane is secured around either a cotton bale core or a core of 55-gallon barrels. If you use the barrels just alone, they would roll easier, probably too easy, and a cannonball would shatter them. So what you do, you place the sap roller in position, and you're going to push it ahead of you. And you're going to be digging behind it. You're going to be digging, roughly you want your approach trench to be at least 8 feet wide. You want it not as wide as the sap roller. You want it about 6 feet deep, and you push it ahead of you, and you dig behind it, throwing the dirt up to the right and left. Why the zigzags? The zigzags are, and these were used in the Middle Ages when they only had bows and arrows. The zigzags are to give you cover. So you're going on a trench like this. This keeps the Confederates from firing down your trench. Then you go like this, up this, up this, up this. Now when you get up on here where those both are, you're going to now run into both Confederate small arms and artillery fires. And these trenches, these saps are going to be pushed ahead of them until they get up there near where the two saps are going to converge. The two saps are going to converge at that blue marker. When they go up to that blue marker, they push a single sap close. And when they get as close as they can go with a sap roller, before they run into too heavy resistance, such as will result in burning the sap roller on the Logan Redoubt, the Logan approach, which is cotton bales pushed along on a railroad car, or one of these sap rollers that is going to get too close down at the Second Texas Lunette, and you're going to be able to destroy the sap roller, make it too costly to continue to do it. You will then go underground like they do at the Third Louisiana Redan and drive a gallery or a mine under the enemy works, and then open and detonate it. Now, at the time, Vicksburg, on the third day of July, when Pemberton is entering into negotiations with Grant to see what terms might be given, Grant is now prepared to detonate mines under a number of Confederate strong points. Under Square Fort, which has now become Fort Garrett. We'll let Terry or the general tell you why it changes its name. And personally, I wouldn't want the name changed to me. They are at other points, and they're going to detonate these mines at a number of points on the 6th day of June and launch another all-out attack. But we will not know whether we'll succeed or not, and have counterfactual history to figure out one way or another if it would, but it will. But the surrender of Vicksburg will nullify it. So we'll turn it over to my friend Terry, who can again point out. Now these, briefly, the only one I'm going to mention, these were hardly visible, these saps, until the APCW program, Accelerated Public Works Program of 1963, and we didn't have to worry about compliance, and they would have never been restored here.
The compliance process is clearly a nightmare that's only getting worse as the years pass by. The area directly behind me was as dense of woods as you see elsewhere in the park. We cleared it back around 1999 in time for the park's 100th anniversary. We opened up 14 acres again to expose the terrain features between the Union and Confederate lines. You now understand why this fort is situated where it is, what its killing ground is, and how the Union soldiers had to approach this fortification. As our staff and budgets continue not so much to shrink, but not keep pace with the demands placed upon the park, it's more and more vital that this resource, meaning the park, speak for itself. And right now this park cannot do that because its voice is muted by this dense stand of trees that completely block the terrain features that made Vicksburg such a natural fortress. But in talking about this review and compliance process, let me just mention briefly the Kentucky Monument, which is directly behind me here. It's hard to see at the present moment due to the high grass. But the Commonwealth of Kentucky was the last of the 28 states authorized by the Parks Enabling Act to erect a state memorial here at Vicksburg. Although this process on the part of Kentucky started way back in 1903 with the veterans themselves, due to in-house political fighting in the Commonwealth at that point in time, no appropriation was ever made. But a site was reserved by the Commonwealth of Kentucky to place their state memorial. You'll note it's situated between the lines, symbolic of the fact that Kentucky was represented on both sides of the battle lines during the Vicksburg campaign. And so by selecting a spot in between, you're not favoring either side, but it gave the state an opportunity to erect a monument that would demonstrate reunification, brotherhood, peace, forgiveness, and the spirit of peace that reigned throughout the 20th century. Well, when the Commonwealth of Kentucky finally came up with the design for their monument, reminiscent of the state seal that many of you are familiar with, showing two men shaking hands, a colonial and a frontiersman, they wanted to have the two presidents, Davis and Lincoln, shaking hands, symbolic of peace and brotherhood. We had absolutely no problem with that here at the park. And so we approved the proposed design, sent it on to our regional office, where it sat for 30 days as required for people in the regional office, the historic landscape architects, the historians, the landscape architects, etc., to review and comment on it. No one commented on it. And so the regional director signed off on it as approved, notified the Commonwealth of Kentucky that the monument had received regional approval and went up to Washington for final approval. While I was sitting in Washington, somebody in our regional office said, "Wait a second, I haven't reviewed that." He had 30 days to do it. He said, "I haven't reviewed that and I have a problem with it." He feared that by having Lincoln and Davis shaking hands on this monument, that visitors might think that was an actual historic event versus the symbolism that it was to portray. And so for that reason, he objected to it, and the Washington office rejected the design approval, said they could not be shaking hands, but they could be extending their hands toward one another. Now, the Commonwealth of Kentucky didn't like that idea. If they weren't going to be shaking hands, then they weren't going to be extending hands either. And so they have their hands at their sides. I think Lincoln is holding his lapel. Davis is holding a hat in one hand and his cane in the other. And so here this monument is supposed to symbolize peace, brotherhood, forgiveness, and so on by these two men shaking hands. Well, when the monument is finally put up, there was no supervision from Kentucky, and our chief of maintenance and other members of the staff were tied up elsewhere in the park. So when the stone cutters came and the folks came to set the bronze, rather than put these two men at least facing one another, they put them back to back. So going from a monument to symbolize peace and forgiveness, here these two men are forever enemies facing away from one another. So we had to drill new holes in the pedestal, realign the monument, realign the two statues so they're at least facing one another. But it goes to show the bureaucratic crap, if you'll excuse the expression, that you have to go through nowadays with these review and compliance processes, and how they can and truly have a bad effect on park resources.
I hear the story every time I hear it. It still tickles me to some degree. I came to the dedication of the monument 3 years ago, and the Kentucky folks were still awfully mad, I can assure you. Now, about in the 1990s, when this area was cleared out, and the ridge line immediately to my rear, there were original trenches along that ridge line, which you can see with the Kentucky tablets there all along. This area, after it had been cleared, they actually found live artillery rounds down below that had to be exploded. And I came down with one of my NCOs, and it was just raw dirt down there on a hot summer day. Like it would have been during the siege, because there wouldn't have been any grass here, the artillery fire, everything, there would have been grass fires, it would have all been gone. So the raw dirt down there was, it worked like a Dutch oven on a hot July day in Mississippi. You get down in there and the heat is reflecting off, and my NCO dropped down from heat exhaustion over me. Got him into the sedan and ran him down the Sonic Drive-In and bought him a 55-gallon drum of cherry Coke. But I got a really good feel on that day. As we came out of there, we were completely drenched in perspiration. And you got a feel, a minor feel for what it would have been like here during the siege. One of the things Grant wanted to do, because of his attacks of 19 and 22 May, was end this thing before the summer months. He knew what it was going to be like down here. He wasn't from Mississippi, but he knew. And the misery down there during the months of June and July would have been intense as these guys are digging these trenches, pushing these sap rollers up, the Confederates up here in the fortification, misery all around. Now, in the month of June, up in the fort, Colonel Isham Garrett is in the fort with his men. One of his men is picked off by a sharpshooter. It enrages Garrett. He picks up the man's rifle and tries to return fire, and he is shot dead. Well, I didn't think it was funny, but whatever. So Garrett goes down. He did not realize that he had been promoted to general officer. The orders had arrived that day, but hadn't been delivered out here. So General Garrett goes down. He will be one of the 5 generals killed, or at least who will die during the Vicksburg campaign. 4 died by combat. 1 will die of dysentery, as Terry's told you. General Garrett is buried in Vicksburg in a midnight funeral because they don't want it publicized that the Federals have killed a general officer. His body is eventually disinterred from downtown Vicksburg in a lot, in a house where he was buried, and taken to the Cedar Hill Cemetery, where he's buried today in the Confederate Cemetery. Questions? Yep.
Which Union state and what Confederate state has the most regiments?
what Union state, what Confederate state had the most regiments here? Well, clearly the answer on the Union side is going to be the state of Illinois. On the Confederate side, yeah, something I've never thought about before. Confederate side is not going to be Mississippi. We've got 2 Mississippi brigades at Gettysburg at this time frame. Missouri. Terry, you got any thoughts on that? What would be the which Confederate? What would be the most regiments here from what state? Louisiana. Louisiana. Good answer. Good answer. Louisiana.
And the nickname for Temple Shalom, the Saints Shalom at the lake.
Comes over here and puts some debris in the planning, which will have to equal how much money we can get. This represents Sergeant Messenger entering the railroad redoubt. Well, they have this monument. They go to Iowa's going to 1906. The Iowa Commission from Chickamauga. They're going to have at least the ghost of General Thomas with them. The Iowa Commissions for Andersonville, Shiloh, and Vicksburg. The large number of veterans will come down and they'll dedicate the monument. You got a problem there. One branch of the service is not represented. Cavalry. So that is how that gets in here. The cavalry that is after the design of the monument. Both Terry and I did not know it was carried straight to the monument until we were chatting whether we should come over here or not. And we would find time, but it kind of ties everything together. And I was it shows at least either two people that don't appreciate arts, minds go the same way, or 2 people who admire military art, and the Gallery of Islands flow the same way.
That manned by the Union Army of the Tennessee, the besieging line, and the Army of the Tennessee is under Grant's command. Now, at the outbreak of this campaign, Grant's army mustered about 32,000 to 35,000 men, but by the end of the campaign, having been heavily reinforced, Grant's army would number in excess of 70,000 soldiers. Now, as Ed and Parker and I have discussed, and as you well know, Vicksburg was considered the most decisive campaign ever waged on American soil. As a result, the northern states and northern soldiers who helped gain this victory were very proud of their achievements. The northern states, very proud of their men, appropriated hefty sums of money to erect monuments in their honor here at Vicksburg. And so as you drive along the Union lines here, you'll note the tablets are painted blue denoting United States forces, and all the monuments for the first 8 miles of this tour will be erected by the states of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and so on. Once you jump across into the former Confederate defense line, there's a paucity of monuments. Again, it's a state responsibility to erect monuments here at Vicksburg. As Vicksburg was a significant Union victory, the northern states appropriated hefty sums of money. The southern states were more reluctant to erect monuments. They did not do so until a later period of time, and although they appropriated hefty sums of money as well, their money just didn't go as far. And so there's a paucity of monuments, and there are smaller monuments on the Confederate line. But as we drive out the Union siege lines, as we are doing, the Confederate line at all times will be off to your left, varying distances from several hundred yards to just a few feet. That's how close they would get by the end of the siege. No trees off to your left. At any point along this long siege and defense perimeter around the city of Vicksburg, opposing forces would have had a clear, unobstructed view of the opposing force. The dense forest that you see here today was in essence hand-planted by the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 1930s to retard the harmful effects of erosion. It is our hope, at least it's my hope, whether the park administration shares that or not remains to be seen, but I certainly hope that we can remove much of this dense forest over time to restore the battlefield to its wartime appearance, allow this resource to speak for itself, to give our visitors a better understanding of the events that transpired here, the events for which this park was established to commemorate. On your left is the very first of the impressive state memorials we'll come to. This is that erected by the great state of Minnesota, dedicated back in 1907. The woman figured there is peace. Come on, that's a pretty lame huzzah. The day after the Battle of Big Black River Bridge. Throughout the afternoon and well into the night of May 17th, the Confederates are frantically and furiously working to strengthen their fortifications, clear fields of fire, and thicken that obstruction of felled trees known as abattis in their front. With the rising sun on the 18th day of May, all was in a pretty good state of readiness. But with the rising sun on May the 18th came a deathly silence that prevailed over the entire field. But throughout the morning of the 18th day of May, the Union Army is busy bridging the Big Black River in 3 different locations and by 3 different methods. As a result, for the first and only time during this campaign, Grant's 3 Army Corps will not be in ready supporting distance of one another. It will be Sherman's Corps that first approaches Vicksburg from the northeast, followed by McPherson in the center, and then by John McClernand coming up from the southeast. Grant is anxious for a quick victory. After all, his army has penetrated deep into the interior of Mississippi. He has defeated Confederate forces in 5 actions. At Fort Gibson on May the 1st, Raymond May the 12th. 2 days later on the 14th, he's captured the state capital at Jackson. Turning his army west, he defeated Pemberton's field army at Champion Hill on May 16th, and most recently along the line of the Big Black on May the 17th. He is convinced that the Confederates are badly demoralized and that a quick show of force will result in a speedy capitulation of the city and give him the Mississippi River the key to Union victory during the Civil War. But perhaps Grant acted a bit too hasty. In addition, perhaps acting hasty, he was unaware of the fact that there were 2 fresh Confederate divisions in Vicksburg that Pemberton had not taken out into the field with him. Those 2 divisions, unbloodied so far, were placed in the most likely areas to receive the Federal attack. Just that area is where the attack was made on May the 19th. So the first attack against the city of Vicksburg is poorly planned, poorly coordinated, poorly executed, and will easily be repulsed by these fresh Confederate troops. Union casualties on May the 19th, about 1,000 men. Although his nose was bloody, Grant was not willing to stop yet. He made a more thorough reconnaissance, brought his entire army well up in hand, and 3 days later on May 22nd, he tried once again. In a massive assault along a 3-mile front, his troops succeeded in reaching the Confederate parapets, planted their colors in several areas, but were finally driven back at the point of bayonet with the loss of approximately 3,000 soldiers. Here on your left is the Michigan Monument. The woman is the spirit of Michigan. You'll note in her hand she's holding a cog, symbolic of the industrial might of the North. And it's clearly the industrial might of the North that was pitted against the agricultural interests of the South during this conflict. The Michigan Monument fittingly dominates the landscape here at tour stop number 1, where the guns of Captain Samuel de Gollier's 8th Michigan Battery stood poised for battle. This is the largest concentration of cannon in Grant's siege lines around the city. There were 220 Union field pieces in battery here in Vicksburg that were augmented by the placement of 13 big guns taken from the Union fleet and placed in land-based batteries. There are 22 guns in battery here during the course of the siege. The target of these guns, the Great Redoubt, which you see high atop the hill where the Louisiana Monument now stands. That fort is the largest and most formidable fort in the Confederate defense perimeter of Vicksburg. It guards the Jackson Road entrance into the city. Louisiana, being the first southern state to select the site for their monument, selected the point in all the park. Let's get out here, folks.
Here would be in there. There's the Great Redoubt. There's the third Louisiana military from after crossing the railroad. The visitor center would be right in that area. Now on, this again illustrates the advantages of not having compliance. This reconstruction was done under the Accelerated Works Project program of 1963. This had existed here, but it was enlarged under that program. You didn't have to jump the hooks there, and the object was to spend money and employ large numbers of people. The relief program, like in the 1940s. So those would be golden days if you wanted to work rapidly here and not have to jump to any bureaucratic hooks. The main thing is if you didn't spend the money, that is when you were in big trouble. Now back to the more important thing. Of 63, we were talking about how you interpret them and let the people get a feeling of time and place. Now, again, all Union Corps will do the same. They will place artillery, and at 6 o'clock, they will hammer the Union position. The Navy is doing the same thing as they come up the Mississippi River. And the guns will fall silent. Now, you folks will like this attack, because we're going to have some Illinois boys in it. Now, the woods, of course, were cleared out a considerable distance from the north. You can see the Jackson Road at that time. And if we were here on that morning, there would be no woods in that picture there. We would see, down in those ravines, deployed as skirmishers, would be the 17th Illinois Infantry. Last in this ravine here, was advanced by attack formation known as attack by column of companies, would be the 8th Illinois and the 81st Illinois. Last in reserve, last in this ravine over here, is going to be the 7th Missouri Irish Regiment, carrying a green flag, carrying no bra. They would have somebody like Father Miller with them, and supported by the 32nd Iowa. They have been equipped, at least the 7th Missouri, with storming ladders designed for them by Captain Tresenian. Now, Tresenian is pretty good with those tree truck mortars, but he's not going to be doing very good with these ladders. From his distance, he's going to calculate it is 17 feet from the bottom of the ditch to the top of the scarp.
Oh dear.
So, after the bombardment ceases, these guys had done good. These men are the ones that have beaten up Barton's Georgians and captured 10 Yankee guns, 10 Confederate guns at the Battle of So when it's very, you got to remember that bombardment is sort of a great amount of dust and loose soil when it's dry, pulverized easily, and lots of great smoke. Well, if we were standing here, we would see the Union storming line. And of the 7th Illinois, and they're going to find out we didn't silence the Confederate guns. We didn't silence their small arms fire, and they start firing on it. So that means they're going to pull back. And they're again going to open fire on the enemy work, on artillery. Hammer it, and then they're going to try again. Now we're watching here. Coming up there is the 81st Illinois. Ordered by the 8th Illinois, advancing in a formation that is called rectangle. It has a front, and it will have 4 companies. They'll have the other 8 companies back up to abreast behind them, and back behind them is going to be the 81st. The same way the 7th Missouri is going up over there. And this time, and I hate to say it for you Illinois people, maybe you're smarter than those other people. When Colonel Dollins is shot down, your column is going to fall back into that ravine, which is not wooded then, but has had the timber removed. Now, if you're over here and watching it from a distance, you're going to think we're going to succeed. As the 32nd, as the 7th Missouri goes up, onward and onward, and they reach the ditch running the rebel works. Now remember, that ditch is approximately 10 feet wide, 6 feet deep, and it is 23 feet from the bottom of the ditch to the top of the scarp, where where you can see the skyline there. And they're going to plant their ladders, and they would probably like to get a hold of Captain Treselyan at this moment, because their ladders are do not have enough length, and those Confederates are soon going to get 12 and 18-pound shells and start rolling them down among those Irish lads and some of the 32nd Ohio that gets in there. Within a half an hour, Stevenson's attack has been repulsed with very heavy casualties. And those are the only men in McPherson's his 8 brigades that are going to be seriously engaged on the morning of the 22nd. As they say, this young boy maybe needs Grant closer to him and telling him, particularly on the attack of these people down here, we're going to be repulsed with a loss of less than a score of men. All right, we got a good flag there now. All right, very good. There it is. We got a number of these. Is that the flags that you made a long time ago? Oh, you got a new one made.
My wife made these.
Oh, these are wonderful. They got whatever happened to that one, they paid a lot of money.
We still have it. We use it from time to time.
All right, they repulsed. Now, we should have had Parker up there in the ditch. Then if we could get some of these people he has trouble with, they'd have their chance of rolling 18-pound and 12-pound shells down in with him. Well, they're repulsed. We're going to let either Terry or Parker talk about the artillery and anything they have, because we're now down to 2.5 hours. Very good.
Parker, I know a bunch of bureaucrats would like to have volunteer to lead the assault with you up there and up that hill. The fort you see before you, the Great Redoubt, is the largest, most formidable fort in the Confederate defense line. It guards the Jackson Road entrance into the city of Vicksburg. The Jackson Road off to your right on the high ground is the highest point of ground in all of Warren County. That's also where the Illinois Monument stands, and we'll be stopping there in just a few moments. But defending this fort were the men of the 21st Louisiana Infantry. The captain of Company A was no less an individual than David Todd. Now, you may not be familiar with the good captain, but you certainly know his sister Mary quite well, who married Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln had 2 brother-in-laws fighting in Confederate gray here in the Vicksburg campaign. In addition to Captain David Todd, who survives the siege, there's also Confederate Brigadier General Benjamin Helm, who is serving with Joe Johnston's relief army over in Jackson. Now, Helm, of course, will be killed in action at Chickamauga in September of 1863, just a few short weeks after the siege of Vicksburg ends. When Lincoln was informed of Helm's death, he ordered the White House draped in black. And so there's no place in America where this brother against brother idea is more apparent than in the first family of the land itself. It's also interesting to point out that the men of the 7th Missouri advancing up this hill under the green flag you see here before you, with the gold harp emblazoned with Aaron Go Bra, defending that fort were men of the 21st Louisiana Infantry, who were also Irishmen, almost to a man, from the docks in New Orleans, and they defended that fort underneath a green flag with a gold harp emblazoned Aaron Go Bra. Oh, Ed asked to talk about artillery. You see here behind you the largest concentration of cannon in Grant's siege lines around the city. There were 22 guns in battery here, They were under the command of Captain Samuel de Gallier, the 8th Michigan Battery, who would be mortally wounded here at Vicksburg during the course of the siege. Grant's Union Army had 220 field guns in position along this siege perimeter around the city of Vicksburg. It would also have 13 big guns taken from the Union fleet and placed in land-based batteries to give him added firepower. We also talked briefly about mortars, because in siege operations you feel an acute need for mortars. You see, these field guns with these long barrels give you a low, flat trajectory. Thus, if this is the parapets of Vicksburg, with a low, flat trajectory, if you miss by as little as an inch, you may as well have missed by a mile. It'll just continue to fly until it finally falls to the ground, and in most cases, that fall inside the city of Vicksburg, and there were civilian fatalities during the course of the siege of Vicksburg. Thus, what you want is a mortar that's going to give you a high trajectory to get up and over the works and straight back down on the other side. Although Grant requisitioned mortars, none were sent. As a result, some enterprising Union soldiers simply cut down sweet gum trees, as Parker mentioned, limbed their trunks, strung iron bands around them, and hollowed them out to fit 6 and 12-pound projectiles. And these wooden mortars were used with great effect here at Vicksburg.
Real quickly, the distant hillside in front of the Louisiana Monument, it's a favorite training ground for me when I'm training soldiers. We run them up that hill so they can understand, number one, the reason to be physically fit, understand what these soldiers went through, but the most important lesson is the effects of terrain. If you could, as you're going up the hill, particularly the route of James Dollins' 81st Illinois, my wife made these flags for me so I can let troops understand the method of command and control, try to keep them in a straight line as we go up those hills. The 7th Missouri flag, they'll peel off and go through the punch bowl there, as Ed said, but the 81st Illinois goes across the crest of the ridge. Colonel Dollins will be killed. But the main point is, as you look to your left and your right, you can see the red tablets at certain intervals. And you know, at the red tablets, you're seeing them, you're seeing enemy fire. And at one point in time, there's just a very small convolution of ground. Modern soldiers ride everywhere they go. They ride Humvees, they ride everywhere. Unless you're a good old southern boy and you do bird hunting, a lot of squirrel hunting, a lot of rabbit hunting, you don't get out in the woods, you don't walk the ground, you don't understand terrain. What 10 feet of dirt can do to you or for you. And so it's a good lesson in terrain. Military staff rides are more than history lessons. One valuable lesson running up that hill, I was running a bunch of Marines up there one day. One of them had a heart attack on me. Got to the top of the hill, there was a heart surgeon videotaping us. And he gave us some really good first aid and we got the man to the hospital. But one of my last runs up that hill as an active duty soldier. I was going up the hill and the sergeant major turns to me and we get to the top. We ran all the way up to the monument. He turned to me and said, "Sir, I've never seen you let a man beat you to the top of the hill." I said, "Jimmy, I ain't never been 50 before either."
Another thing to notice, the Park Service is going to be a very bad intrusion. If you look on the cars that have passed there, that was gentle slope, and the Park Service, in an ill-advised move in the 30s, put the road there rather than back at the monument.
Ed, you'll be pleased to know in the recent draft of our land protection plan, which I updated here recently for the first time in more than 20 years, I've identified those parcels of land directly behind Great Redoubt for acquisition in hopes of someday diverting the tour road around behind the Great Redoubt, moving the present-day tour road to recreate the ditch fronting the work. The idea is to divert traffic around behind the monument, have a parking bay behind the monument out of view, have a walkway leading up into the fort where an elevated platform can be constructed within the figure of the fort so you don't see it from here, and peer out over the parapet wall and have this grand vista before you here to give visitors a better understanding of what happened here. Again, will I see that in my lifetime here? Probably not, but we're working toward that end. One final word on artillery here. The Confederate artillery falls silent very early on in the siege. After all, they are on a limited quantity of munitions. They are on a limited quantity of friction primers, which are your ignition devices. Consequently, very early on in the siege, the Chief of Ordnance for the Confederate Army would issue orders not to fire unless either ordered to or under direct assault. So Confederate guns will fall virtually silent for the duration of the siege. Union guns, on the other hand, still have the advantage of mobility. You see, in the fixed fortifications above you here, you have to have an opening or an embrasure in the parapet wall to thrust your gun through. So those guns are stationary. In the early days, Grant has the advantage of mobility where he can mass his artillery at any point along his line, smother the Confederate artillery, drive the Confederates away, dismount those guns. And so he has that advantage all throughout, and it really works to Grant's favor, who has an uninterrupted line of supplying communications to the north via the Mississippi and Yazoo River. So these guns are firing virtually around the clock at some point along this line for 47 days. As one Confederate soldier wrote about, the only time the Union guns fell silent is when the cannoneers ate their morning, noon, and evening meals.
This is probably a good thing to point out, and what Terry has said. After May 22nd, in spite of being on the high ground and the Union being on the low ground, the Confederates will suffer more casualties from trauma than the veterans. They're significant. Also, you will understand why, because the Union are on low ground. Besides the artillery, the Union are on the low ground, the Confederates on the skyline. Lying down and putting your marksmen on low ground, the enemy on high ground. The high ground is going to silhouette you, and you're going to, your life insurance, you lost a good deal of your life insurance. We better go. We're now
First, we're fast approaching the Shirley House, the Jackson Road, and the Illinois Monument. Of course, the Jackson Road was the main thoroughfare leading into Vicksburg in 1863, and the direct road between the state capital of Jackson and Vicksburg. Jackson being off to your right, roughly 40 miles distance. Astride this road in battle formation would be the troops of General John Logan's division. Hence, as we round the bend here, you'll see the historic trace of the Jackson Road going off to your right. Towering on the ground in front of you will be the standing statue to John Logan, old Blackjack himself. Now, thanks to the largesse of you dear people in the Chicago Round Table and other round tables across Illinois, we re-gilded the eagle atop the Illinois Monument several years ago, and most recently gilded the interior inscription. So for most of you, this will be the first time you've seen the monument now fully restored. So we'll be stopping here to get out and go inside the monument and see the gilding effort. Also on your right, the Shirley House, you note the orange fencing around it. We have just this week begun a stabilization project on the building. It is the only surviving wartime structure in the park. We received funding from the Congress in the tune of about $300,000 to put on a new roof, replace the windows and frames, and do some foundation stabilization. We hope eventually to get a full-blown funding from the Congress for a full-blown restoration of the building and open it up to the public. Now, to go up the Illinois Monument, to note there are 47 steps. We talked about symbolism. That's one step for each day of the siege of Vicksburg. You note above the portico, 3 women, symbolic of Cleo, the muse of history. In the center, she's flanked by women representing the North and South, reunited in peace, and the reunited nation protected by the outspread wings of the American eagle. So we'll get up here and go inside the monument and take a look at the beautiful gilding that was made possible, again, through your largesse, for which we truly thank you.
counting steps in.
It's all free, exactly.
were done in the 1954 and 1955 to a whole series of paintings to enhance the image of the United States Army. So this flag will not be where it is in the painting, in the Baron painting. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the attack on, this is our last time we're going to have any prolonged time off the button. Now the Confederates had pulled back into their defenses. The skirmishers will withdraw in on the evening and the morning of the 19th. The Confederate defense line to our front, we're looking west and a little south along the Graveyard Road. You can notice it falls off rapidly to the right and left. To the right is the headwaters of Mid Spring Bayou. To the left is the headwaters of Glass Bayou. You're going to see And this finger, you're going to see this finger up here opening off of it. And just beyond that finger, the ground drops off even into a greater depression before it goes up onto the stockade redan. The stockade redan is given that name because you had to leave you were going to have a stockade of poplar logs across the roadway between the stockade redan and the 27th Louisiana Lunette, which is this work right here. You're going to have a gate in the stockade, and as soon as the last of the Confederate skirmishers come in, they're going to close that gate. In front of the stockade, you're going to have a deep ditch, again approximately 10 feet wide and 6 feet deep. And over there where you can see the Missouri Monument, you have a redan, or a redoubt. It's going to be known as Green's Redan, but it's not going to be known as that until after the 25th day of June, when General Greene runs into the same type of problem that General Garrett had some week before. He gets an early trip to meet his ancestors. So you can see in front of us, the Confederates have felled the timber, so these ravines are filled with felled timber. Now, when Grant arrives here in his army, there's a question: who is the most overconfident? The soldiers themselves believe all it is going to take is a demonstration to cause the Confederates to go in the spot. After all, the Confederates have been beaten by Champion Hill 3 days before. They had been routed at the Big Black in a battle in which the Confederates don't like to talk about when they go to reunions after the war. So Grant is going to order an attack on the city. The first Yankees you're going to see from here, stockade redan, are late on the after evening of the 18th as they take possession of this high ground behind you, toward which I am looking at. Now, the Confederates, who is in the work on the Confederates? Of course, they're going to name this work here the 27th Louisiana Lunette. That is going to be held in the 27th Louisiana, and you're going to have the 34th Mississippi, 1st Missouri, 5th Missouri, and their 3rd Missouri in reserve. Now, since it's not going to, so Grant orders an attack for that afternoon. There's going to be almost no artillery support. You're not going to see these Union cannon here. You're not going to see those Union cannon over there, or these Union cannon behind us. And you're not going to see any trenches behind us. So the plan of attack is as follows. They're going to assign this attacking force to Frank Blair. Blair's men have not been seriously engaged. They were not at the Battle of Jackson, and that's the only battle that Sherman's men have participated in. So Frank Blair is going to be on center stage. Blair is going to have 3 brigades to attack, forming on the high ground beyond us, where we're going to see that fellow on something they didn't have in those days, on the cell phone. That is going to be Kilby Smith's brigade. Kilby Smith's brigade has a lot of Illinois boys in it, and particularly coming down this area where the road is going to be the 55th Illinois, from out around Waukegan and to the west of downtown Chicago. And you're going to have a 54th, he's going to have 5 regiments, including the 83rd Indiana. Now on his right, Kilby Smith is going to be Giles Smith's people. Now they're going to be considerably to the north of where we see those guns and where we see those horrible trees that you don't want to see. And he is going to have with him the 13th Infantry. Now the 13th Infantry Sherman has a special feeling for. And they're probably going to not do as well as Sherman is going to think they do. He is the colonel of the 13th Infantry, so his rank in the regular army at this time is colonel. They are raised, they have seen no more service than most of the volunteers. They have been raised out in the area of Iowa and Illinois generally, and they're going to be commanded by Edward Washington, a kin of Big George. They're going to, and Ewing is going to have such regiments, the 6th Missouri, organized as Zouaves, fought as Zouaves at both Donelson and Shiloh. And they're going to have the 8th Missouri. These are going to be these people here. And then you're going to have these Easterners. Somebody was worried about these people. These people have arrived. They've served in the East, in Western Virginia, and some of them in the Kanawha Division at the Battle of Antietam. They've arrived here in the spring, and they are commanded by Hugh Ewing. Now, Hugh is both a brother-in-law and a foster brother of William. Hugh had also busted out of West Point, so he's gone to West Point, but he had not graduated. Incidentally, he and his two brothers were 49ers with my great-grandfather. So I have some close connection with that brand, at least with those two Ewing. All right, now the plan is we're going to advance in line of battle. Now, with this rugged terrain, with these abattis and such, you've got some real problems. Now, as you all know, a line of battle is you're in linear formation. One, it didn't work at Bunker Hill, did it? Or Breed's Hill, as it's really called, for the Brits, but it's the same formation, shoulder to shoulder. Each man occupying about 2.5 foot of space, and 1.5 steps behind the first rank will be the second rank. Then you want the mean SOBs as the file closers, the lieutenants and the sergeants, because there's no way a company commander can see what the men behind him are doing, because he stands, he's on the right of the company, with a man right next to his left shoulder. So the file closers will exercise command and control. And that's the way they're going to line up these regiments. That's the same way Giles Smith is, and the same way that Hugh Ewing is. Now we're going to rehearse. Now the Confederates have artillery in their works. Now that means that when we step off, if we're in the 55th Illinois, we're going to come into view over near where we can see that Iowa monument. That means that if you stand there in the stockade redan, you're going to see them some of the time, and you're not going to see them some of the time, but from here on, you're going to see them all the way. Worse off, if you are in the left wing, you're going to be dropping down into that ravine and climb out of. Worse yet, if you are in the 54th Illinois. Now this theory here has really 20-pounder parrots. Evidently the park could not get any 20-pounder parrots when they got their shipment from the Army arsenals. You should like this battery because it's commanded by Lieutenant Hart here, but will eventually be commanded by Captain DeGrasse, who General Thomas would like better. All right, but they are not in position, so you're going to move forward. Now Thomas Kilby Smith is in command, and you're going to see what this is going to do to his formation. They're going to break up. Think of these guys moving along the road, the right wing of the 55th Illinois, but those guys down there, and it's going to go to pot. He's going to be very unhappy, and he's somewhat like Richard Taylor. He's going to hold his men and tell him he's going to reform, or he's going to hold them under fire. Then they will advance, and most of them will halt on that ridge where we see the cannon. They are then 100 yards from the enemy position. The 83rd Indiana is going to get as far as those guys are, but they're not going to be in the painting because they're a volunteer unit, and they're going to get up into this area here. But they're halted. They ain't going any farther, and they're going to hug Mother Earth. Hug her just like you would your wife, because it's more valuable to you hugging Mother Earth at this time than hugging your wife, because that's going to save your life. They're going to burn up a lot of ammunition. Back to that. Then you're going to see, coming down off that high ground, you're going to see Giles Smith's men out in front, the skirmishers of the 13th. We ought to get those guys over there and get them to really do some exercise. Come down off that ridge, through that hollow there, and climb up. That's what do you want them to do that? Yeah!
Yeah!
They don't look so very happy, do they? All right. Now the 11th, the 13th is going to get shot up. They're going to have Captain Washington is going to be mortally wounded. Tom Ewing is going to, the other brother is going to end up in charge of them. Sergeant Brown is going down, and they're going to go through 13 kilometers. But they're not going to get up on top of that work like the Bavarians, not like the barricading show. They don't get out of the ditch. They don't do any better than the 83rd Indiana. Well, it's going to look bad for the Westerners, because advancing across last headwaters of Vicksburg Bayou against where we see those three markers over there, where Colonel Marks has his 27th Louisiana, we have Hugh Ewing's people. We have, of course, the 4th West Virginia. We have the 30th Ohio. They had beaten up those Confederates in South Mountain. And the 37th Ohio had beaten up Confederates in the west, as in the east as at the 47th. And they're going to advance, and they're going to be dressed like you do in the east. They probably haven't got used to the advantages of a hat over a kepi. Some of them may even be wearing their stocks on their necks. And it looks like you're going to have to eat crow if you're one of these Western boys, because it looks like they're going into the 27th Louisiana next. But at the last moment, they're turned. Now, we'll show Sherman has a real problem. His real problem is his memory is not as good as he thinks it is. He's going to describe this event in his memoirs. Like, I hope General Hills reads it, because he's going to say this event happens on the 22nd. And the event I'm going to describe is going to happen on the 19th. So Sherman shows that even in a thing that makes no difference at all, whether it happens one day or 3 days later, but it makes you suspicious when you start catching a fellow having trouble with dates. When it has doesn't make a difference. That shows his memory isn't as good as he thinks it is. So what is happening up here On that ridge there, we have Colonel Oscar Malmberg. This man looks like Colonel Oscar Malmberg. He is a Swedish soldier, Martin. He does not partner with his men. Now, whether he is known to be a convivial sort. Being a convivial sort, has he been drinking that day? Or is he going to slur his words because he speaks English with quite a Swedish accent? And you're going to have Orrin Howe. Now, he is not the youngest Medal of Honor recipient. I've got two others that are 12 years old, Willie Johnson being one of them, who are younger. But it's not determining from what he did. This is that Oscar Malmberg is going to look for another volunteer after several others had not done well and send them on a dash. So where he's going to dash is from that area where we see that monument and those cannons. He's going to dash up this road here, and he's going to dash back into where he's going to find Uncle Billy, someplace in the area of where you see that monument there. So he's going to do that 100-yard dash. He's going to be wounded. Bullets are going to hit the ground to get him, and he's going to arrive there. Now, either Oscar was confused from being conviviality, or Orrin Howe didn't understand his broken English, or Orrin forgot in the excitement. But it's not detracting from Orrin Howe what he did, because he's going to confuse the caliber of the weapons that they have. And you will become a recipient of the Medal of Honor. Well, the Yanks are stopped. 919 casualties. Less than the Confederates, of a little over 100. And they pulled back, and there was a house out in front of the works there, and the center fire was during the night, lighting up the scene. Now, Grant is going to decide, well, they stopped us today. Will they stop us now? So he's going to schedule an all-out attack on the 22nd, because only one Union division was seriously engaged. They lost 700 of the 919 casualties on the 19th, and that is so we're going to use all our men, probably well over 35 to somewhere between 35 and 40,000, and we're going to attack everyone is going to attack, but each corps commander will be able to decide his method of attack. We've already seen what John A. McClellan, the only thing that is a common denominator, they moved artillery up fairly close. Not up there yet, but back into this area here. So they're all, the one common denominator is a 4-hour bombardment. And to attack at 10 o'clock. The corps commanders have all met, and they've synchronized their watches. So, Sherman, what's he going to do? Now, this time, we're going to have a network. We're going to have roughly the same people we had before. But Sherman realizes we didn't do very good when we attacked in line of battle. So, I'm going to send a battering ram down the Graveyard Road. He's going to ask for 150 volunteers, which will be known as the Forlorn Hope, and they will all come out of the convivial Frank Blair's. And these men will dismantle a building back here closer to the front. Mrs. Grant isn't here now. Mrs. Grant will arrive later to keep tab of Yulee. And they will dismantle this building, and they will use the rubble for purpose. That means that when you go forward, you're going to lose his life at the attack on Fort McAllister in December 1864, will not become a Medal of Honor recipient, though most of these others will. And he will lead the attack. And I think you look like Captain Gross. You've got the flag. Now the bombardment has ceased. You're not ready to go because already forming astride this road and extending back for more than a mile is going to be the men of Wright Blair's division. In advance is going to be, out here, column is going to be the 30th Ohio. Behind them, the 37th Ohio. Then behind them, the 4th West Virginia and the 47th Ohio. Behind them, Maurer's men, the same formation. Behind Maurer, doing that advertisement when you're driving a pickup. Because they're convinced that the artillery fire has pulverized. The visibility is very poor because the great clouds of dust has this type of soil pulverized. Great clouds of gray smoke from the black powder, and Trogdon looks at Ewing. Ewing gives him the sign, and down that road you're going to come at a trot. You're going by here at a trot. And you're going to see up there that cut is much. The sides of that cut are very precipitous things. They're not gentle slopes. And when you hit that cut, they're going to find out, boy, were we wrong. We didn't pulverize the Confederates. And you can see those guys in those floppy hats beginning to line the firing step there. And you can tell that they have rifles in their hands. And they're going to fire a crashing volley into you. And the dead and wounded are going to fall. You are going on with a handful of men. And you're going to jump in that ditch, and where you can see that blue marker up ahead there, you're going to plant Ewing's headquarters flag. Boy, you should have Ewing's headquarters flag. Right? Okay. All right, now comes the 30th Ohio. Falling behind. Now, as they get closer, they know they're in trouble. Because as they arrive here, they're going to see men working their way to the rear. Probably some men slightly wounded with 4 or 5 pretty good men that haven't been hit helping them. That's the definition of a good Samaritan. You're going to get 4 healthy men to help 1 slightly wounded man to the rear. You're going to see a lot of blood and gore there, and they're going to charge in there, and it's going to be a repetition. What next, boys? All right, the next thing is 37th Ohio. Fortunately, Colonel Counts has lost his leg. Maybe he would have lost his life this day. As Colonel Von Blessing,
General Grant's headquarters site. That's the building it was telling you about that was dismantled by the Union soldiers to use the materials of bridge planks and scaling ladders for the May 22nd assault against the stockaded dam that ended in such dismal failure. All the monuments are at along this stretch of the road honor units that were not here in the immediate siege lines around the city, but rather Union troops that were out on the periphery of operations, guarding Grant's supply and communication lines, including the troops in northeast Louisiana that safeguarded his supply enclaves at Milliken's Bend, Young's Point, and Goodrich's Landing. Most of those would be U.S. colored troops due to the service. But the monuments out here also honor the troops that are out on what's called the exterior line. Recall from our discussions that during the course of the siege of Vicksburg, Joe Johnston gathered an army of relief, as it came to be known, over in the Jackson Canton area. Grant was well aware of these activities. So to safeguard his rear, to prevent Johnston from breaking through his encircling army and rescuing the garrison of Vicksburg, Grant called on reinforcements of his own that were duly sent. Rather than put those troops in the immediate siege lines around Vicksburg, as he already had a solid cordon around the city, he placed them out along the line of the Big Black River, where we were yesterday, facing in an easterly direction. This force was placed under Sherman's command and was referred to as the Army of Observation. The line they manned was called the exterior line. So on all these monuments where you see served on the exterior line, that's what that means. They're out along the line of the Big Black River. They would never be seriously threatened by Joe Johnston, but they would serve a vital function.